Welcome back, guys. Today we've got a fun video. This is a 2004 Jeep Grand Cherokee review. It is the Overland edition. It has the Quadra-drive drivetrain, which we'll talk a lot more about later, and it has the 4.7 liter high output V8. And the reason this thing is so special, though, because I probably wouldn't be making this video if it wasn't for this. It has 374,000 miles. And a lot of freaking buzzers going off. But anyway, what's really interesting about these vehicles that nobody really talks about, because they've just kind of faded off into, faded off as time has gone on. These were one of the higher end luxury SUVs of the time, by feature set. So, for example, you've got cushy 90s Cadillac-esque seats, full leather. Okay, I gotta pull this key out. You've got full leather. You've actually got like a padded dash. They aren't just all hard plastics everywhere, which, is something that no American car company was doing. Now, is the interior, by modern standards, like super nice? Well, not necessarily, but again, you have to compare it to what was being made in its era. And it's kind of like 90s BMW-esque in here. And for 374,000 miles, just kind of starting with the interior, this thing has held up shockingly well. So a couple little, scrapes and bruises on the interior panels, a little bit of like weather cracking here, but nothing that I would really even consider replacing for what this thing is. And it's just been solid. Same thing in the back. He's got some stuff back here to keep this thing running. We'll get more into some of the stuff later, but yeah, it's in really darn good shape. And keep in mind, the owner of this, previous owner, drove it to like most of this mileage. My buddy just got it 10,000 miles ago. And it's actually kind of a fun story. He got it for free from a coworker who was done with it. And he had been using it kind of as a backup vehicle for one of his friends. And so it was time for it to move along. So what the heck, a free running and driving vehicle of any sort, much less something with kind of a bit of a fun pedigree. So the interior in general, like you're seeing here as I ramble on, is doing pretty good. He had stuck these WeatherTech mats in there, and it's actually a pretty comfortable place to be in 374,000 miles worth of time. The only thing I've noticed is, and it's maybe hard to see on video, but the driver's seat is leaning a little bit in toward the console, I would say. At least it feels like that, so maybe the foam is just worn a certain way, but you constantly feel like you're like shifting yourself back over. I don't know, at least that's what it felt like to me. Other than that, though, things doing really good. So one thing that he mentioned that I thought was pretty cool, that's kind of an interior feature, it actually has rain sense wipers, which I never would have thought something of this era would have had. So that's really pretty darn cool, actually. So a lot of stuff in this time didn't have a computer of any sort, for readouts and stuff. Unfortunately, you really can't see the screen well, but take my word for it. You've got, fuel economy and miles to empty and your trip meters and stuff. So it's kind of nice having a lot of these features for that period of time. This is, very luxury. Same thing with the auto climate control, incredibly luxury for the time to have dual climate zone and your separate temperature readings. Other stuff did have this, like my 05 Silverado, for example, had that and this. But again, it was pretty rare in a lot of ways. Heated seats, which is nice. It also has adjustable pedals. Again, not a super common feature in the time. So pretty darn well optioned vehicle for what it is. I will say these are unibody SUVs. And, being 6'1", the headroom's a little light. Obviously, the sunroof doesn't help. It's very drivable, but I do feel like I'm looking through the very top of the windshield. Not a big deal, but they are a little bit of a squattier cabin than, say, a Ford Explorer of the era. I actually had an Explorer, and you do get a little more cab height. But anyway, moving on to the exterior. What is this thing all about after 374,000 miles? So we've got some rust. This has been a Northeastern vehicle its entire life. So listen, it's not perfect, but let me tell you what, the fact that this thing's not in a junkyard already is really remarkable. It has been oil undercoated at various times throughout its life, but from what I understand, not super religiously, but it's pretty solid other than the rockers. The rockers are obviously shot, but the underneath is very, very, very good. The doors are in good shape. They're not even rusty at all. Like, look at that door lip. There's just zero rust on basically all of this thing except the rockers. Unfortunately, the rockers took the brunt of it. That one's got a little bit of rust on it, but nothing major. So exterior, you know, it's got some dents and scrapes and bruises and stuff, of course. Got some here. And yeah, that rocker again is shot. No surprise, given the age and mileage and location. But it's lived in, I believe, New Hampshire its whole life. The owner lives in New Hampshire, the current owner and the previous owner. Oh, these things are bubbling up bad too, but this is replaceable, so you could get a new one. It's just the metal underneath this rubber. So other than that, though, fortunately there's all dew on it from last night, but really good shape. Sunroof as well, I should have mentioned that in the interior. Now let's pop the hood and check out this engine. So we've got to hold the hood up, but this is a 4.7 liter high output V8. This is a pretty common engine that they put in a lot of stuff back in this era. I think you could get it in a Dodge Ram with a smaller motor. Obviously all the Jeeps like this had it, stuff like that. However, these were decent motors, but they are known for having head gasket issues from what I understand. Shockingly, this one is original, minus a kind of valve job and head job at 260,000. So basically 100,000 miles ago, it had been serviced. And, you know, it's got things like a new alternator, of course. Sure, it's got a couple more other new parts in here. My buddy said that the front end was rebuilt, which was definitely probably very needed at some point, and it's 374,000 miles. But yeah, I mean, this thing is pretty untouched considering the mileage, which is just truly incredible. Another thing that this thing has had was a front axle rebuild at 120,000 miles. For whatever reason, it had a bearing fail. You know, maybe it got water in the diff or something, or just a manufacturing defect, kind of hard to say. And the only reason it was retired from daily driver duty was because it threw a belt tensioner, locked up a belt tensioner, and the previous owner just said, hey, you know what, I'm gonna get something new anyway, rather than trying to fix this. And they eventually, of course, fixed it. But, you know, it was just kind of an excuse to get something new. It really was running perfectly fine otherwise. And then apparently from 2006 to 2012, it had 320,000 miles. And then since then, only 35,000. So basically, they daily drove it essentially for that first 320,000 miles, which is pretty remarkable. And then it became more of a you know, weekend vehicle, backup vehicle, that kind of thing. So fires right up. No you know, drama there. The oil pressure sensor does not work, which is whatever. It makes a bunch of bings and bongs, which is mildly annoying. I have no idea what that one's for, but whatever. And yeah, so transmission shifts as good as anything I've driven of this era, which is just honestly shocks the heck out of me. And let's talk about the Quadra-drive system. So Quadra-drive, so Jeep has had a bunch of different four-wheel drive systems. They've had regular, what I'll call just kind of old school, you know, it's four-wheel drive, you stick it in and just you get two-wheel drive as a result. They've had systems like Quadra-trac and Quadra-drive. So Quadra-trac is four-wheel drive all the time, so front and rear tires are attempting to spin in it and give it time. And then it will, if it senses slip, it will lock a brake caliper on one tire that's slipping and help push power to the axle that, or to the tire that actually has traction. Anyway, so that's a pretty good system. But the one you actually want is this Quadra-drive. And the reason you want Quadra-drive is because there's actually viscous couplings inside each axle, the front and rear axle. So essentially it's like a all-wheel drive transfer case. And you get like a full locker in the front and rear, but it's not just a full locker in the way that like a, you know, like a limited slip would be, like a Detroit locker with a, you know, locking pawls. It's a very smooth engagement and disengagement. I do think there's clutches, but they do fully lock in on like a limited slip. So it's just a very, very, very streetable luxury four-wheel drive system, kind of like what you would have on a, you know, like like a Range Rover or something, or at least not what you would have on it, but it's in that theme of like you want off-road capability, but you also want luxury. These have a solid front axle and rear axle, which is pretty uncommon by the time you hit 2004. I don't think any other SUV was solid both axles. Yeah, so it's very uncommon in that sense. But it really just, obviously people lift these things and do wild off-roading, but even for mild off-roading, it gives you quite a bit of capability. And they had pretty good breakover angles and stuff like that. This is from an era where Jeeps were still kind of actually made to off-road pretty well. But the amazing thing to me is, guys, 374,000 miles, and it just drives like a normal vehicle. Like there's nothing about this thing that screams, oh, it's old and has a bunch of miles. We're going 60. I mean, perfectly quiet, perfectly fine. It could use shocks a little bit, to be honest, but that's just a maintenance thing. That's nothing against the vehicle for its age. It just needs shocks, right? Everything needs shocks at some point. Other than that, though, there's no like weird driveline clunks or suspension clunks or anything like that. Now, the current owner has done a little bit of work to it, done some like valve cover gasket type stuff just to reduce some oil leaks. It does, he thinks, have a bit of a rear main leak. We'll just ignore that and hope it doesn't get worse. It's not too bad right now. But he's also done, I think, control arms in the rear for the rear axle, radius arms, whatever, something like that. Just a couple little minor things, but nothing major. No, the transmission's original as far as he knows, as far as I know. Like I said, it shifts pretty well. These transmissions were the same as what was in like a Dodge Ram at the time, and although maybe they weren't the best regarded in those vehicles, this is a lot lighter and less powerful than like a Hemi Ram towing a trailer and stuff. So I think that extra kind of ruggedness for such a small SUV probably helped it last longer, as opposed to moving around a big, heavy, full-size pickup. A couple little things I've noticed. The AC is a little bit warm. It is super hot out. We're probably pushing 100 degrees, which is pretty rare for up here in New York State. But it's fine. Like, it keeps you cool enough. It definitely could be a little bit better, but not bad. We're actually going to turn that down because I'm talking. But more importantly, this is interesting. So I'm pretty sure the seat is not broken, the back adjustment. And I have it adjusted all the way up, and I still feel like I'm leaned way back. Like if I put my head on the headrest, I'm like, my chin is in the air. So I wish the seat actually came more forward. That's an interesting discovery that I've made. Yeah, it's all the way up, and you can feel it's against the stoppers. It's not like the motor's not working. So that's kind of an interesting problem. So now that I've driven this a little bit more, something I've noticed, especially driving on the highway, it drives like a solid front axle vehicle, which of course it is, so that's really not surprising. But what I mean by that is when you're kind of like hard cornering and you hit a bump, it kind of shimmies a little bit, it tries to kind of bounce the wheel in your hand, and those are just things that solid axle vehicles do. But it's just kind of an interesting sensation because being a relatively small SUV, A, you're not expecting it to drive like a solid axle vehicle, but B, even large SUVs of the last 25, 30 years have had independent front ends, right? Like the Expeditions and Suburbans have all been independent. Now, obviously, Excursion wasn't, but that's so big that you just expect that to drive like a truck, I feel like. Whereas this, you expect to drive exactly like a car or like a Tahoe, let's say. But it actually drives more truckish than a Tahoe, which isn't good or bad. It's just kind of an interesting finding that I've made. It's very reminiscent of my F-250. And honestly, my F-250 probably has a little bit sharper steering, which is a weird thing to say. Now, this thing has 374,000 miles on it and some amount of mileage on what I'm sure are replaced front end components. So I'm sure it's not as tight as it once was. But even despite that, this has been maintained well enough, and I feel like this is in a, stock-ish enough condition that I just think it was a little bit looser, lighter steering from the factory. Obviously, I'd have to drive one of these things back when it was truly brand new to know that for sure. But, maybe somebody in the comments, if you've driven one of these when they had a lot less miles, let me know. But it does just generically feel a little bit floatier. But it's definitely interesting. It's kind of a unique unique for that reason, for sure. But yeah, this is so if we rewind back to 2004, who would have bought this? Who would have been driving this? Well, in a lot of ways, a guy like me right now would have bought this. And here's why I say that. Because, so I'm wearing my button down here to go to my desk job, my semi-desk job. I'm an engineer by trade. So I have kind of an interesting career and then lifestyle at home, in the sense that it's like, okay, during the day, I could be doing anything from a very important business meeting with higher ups to working on our factory floor, helping get one of my projects implemented and actually turning wrenches and doing manual labor to a degree, right? So my job can be any of those things. And this is actually the type of vehicle that somebody like me probably would have bought back then, because it's got some luxury. So if you're going to take your business associates out on a work lunch, you got heated leather, nice cushy seats. You've got kind of a nice interior for the time. It's a pretty quiet ride, but you've also got some off-road capability. You can go camping out of it if you want to go party on the weekends and do your own thing, kind of more adventurous stuff on the weekend. So it's really just a do-it-all vehicle in the way that a modern half-ton pickup is kind of a do-it-all vehicle if you get a premium trim. I would say that this kind of falls in a similar category, just on a smaller scale. And there really wasn't a ton of competition for what this was. So again, dual solid axles, so solid front, solid rear. And then if you look at an Explorer of this era, definitely a little more street, suburban mom oriented, for lack of a better term. Not really made to go off-road as much. However, they were body on frame. So it is kind of interesting that this is unibody despite having the solid axles. Honestly, in reality, not a big deal one way or another. I think the unibody does give you a little bit lighter. Well, it does give you a little bit lighter chassis, which therefore actually makes it a little better off-road and for just in general purposes. But anyway, so what are your choices, right? It would be a mid-2000s Explorer, which were independent front and rear end by that time. You could get like a Trailblazer, which, I don't know. I'm as much of a Chevy guy as I am. Trailblazers just never did it for me. And then this thing, which had really more luxury and probably better features than the other two combined. It really is just a much classier vehicle. Then you can get into German stuff and whatnot, but at this price point, this is what you would be kind of looking at. So, I don't know. I'm actually a pretty big fan of these. Like I had said earlier, I had a 2004 Explorer, and mine had the V6, not the V8, which back then you really, really, really wanted the V8 because the V6s were very underpowered, and they got terrible mileage anyway, so there was really no benefit. And I don't know, I just found that the 5R45 transmission that Ford put in those Explorers shifted like absolute crap. They got terrible mileage, actually far worse than this. This thing legitimately will get, call it 17 to 20 miles per gallon depending on how you drive it. So that's actually pretty good for this era. My Explorer got literally 13 miles per gallon, and it was a V6 with 30, 40 less horsepower than this. The 4.7 liter high output really is a pretty potent engine for something like this. It's not that heavy of a vehicle, right? So 220, 30, 40 horsepower is actually fine. People think by modern standards you just need 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 horsepower and everything. But I'm here to tell you, you just don't. You don't need that much power. You can cruise at 70, 75 perfectly fine with 200 something horsepower in a mid-size SUV. I know you're thinking that, wow, this thing has two solid front and rear axle. It must not ride super well. But I guess actually driving it, if you didn't jack this thing up and know it had a solid front axle, you really almost wouldn't know it. You do get a little bit of bump steer like you do in any solid front axle vehicle, but it's pretty darn smooth overall, which, it's pretty nice. As far as driving dynamics are concerned, now I'm just cruising down the, essentially an interstate or interstate-like road, let's say, but I did drive this on kind of curvy backcountry roads. I've driven it now at all kind of different speeds, 30, 40 miles an hour, all the way up to 65, 70. And it really is very reminiscent of like old school Cadillac. And again, that's what they were going for, right? They were going for luxury SUV, not sporty SUV like Explorer ST, modern Ford Explorer ST, where it's meant to handle pretty well. That's not what they were going for. They were just going for luxury, and they wanted that smooth, floaty ride. And it really excels at that. It's very, very good for what it's meant to do. And as long as you realize that this thing's not going to be a corner carver, maybe in the way that like a modern SUV kind of would be, then you'll be very satisfied. And honestly, the funny thing is, for most people, that's way better, because most people don't care to be trying to rip corners on a curvy road in their SUV. And sport mode is probably the least used feature on almost any new vehicle by your average person, whereas a smooth, floaty ride would be used every single day over all the crappy roads that everybody inevitably drives on, right? So it's kind of surprising to me that we got away from that kind of floaty Cadillac drive as much as we have on so many different types of vehicles that aren't meant to be sporty. I personally think that the sport SUV, and I understand this is called a sport utility vehicle, but when they say sport utility vehicle, they mean like off-road sport and utility, not like road sport. And that's turned into like road sport and then some utility by definition, the way that cars are now. Welcome back, folks. It is now day 3, and we are on our way to the airport for a work trip that I need to make. And you obviously can't see me. I'm not going to film a lot because of how dark it is. I just wanted to point out the fact that we are taking this thing to the airport. So let's pray to God that after 374,585 miles, this thing is still ready for an important task of making sure that I don't miss my work trip. I was going to take my own truck just to be on the safe side, but I'm like, the whole point of this experiment, and I'm doing this for you guys, is to see if this thing's a viable daily driver. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm using it as a daily driver. So hopefully this camera doesn't come back out with me talking about being stuck on the side of the road or something. So stay tuned. All right, guys, you can't see me, hashtag John Cena, but it's 11, almost 30 at night, if not past 11:30. I just got out of the airport. Quite a long 2 days. Flew out to Indianapolis for work yesterday morning. Left at about 4. They left the house at 4:45 a.m. Got to the airport. Actually, I guess I got to the airport at 4:45. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Then I'm getting home now at about midnight. So, long day, but long day, 2 days, I guess. But it's the way it worked out. I have some personal trips coming up that I didn't want to have overlap with this. Anyway, I'm stumbling over my words because I'm kind of tired. But the old Jeep Grand Cherokee with 374,000 miles started up after sitting at the airport for a couple days. Now, I didn't expect it not to, but I was a little concerned because I didn't want to be stranded in the middle of the night at the airport. So I'm glad she started up. So in conclusion, what do I think? Well, overall, I do like it. Like I said, would I buy one? Right now, no. I have no use for it. But like, if you just want like a decent daily, figure out the reliability situation. Maybe you go with the straight 6 if you're worried about this engine and stuff like that. But probably actually a decent vehicle to just kind of daily. And you could do road trips with this, again, as long as you figure out the reliability situation and everything's good to go, well maintained. It's a comfy enough road trip vehicle. And your purchase price to get into one of these is going to be stupid low. And I think that's the big thing, right? I can't imagine you couldn't get a decent one of these for 5 to 10 grand, which by modern standards is very, very cheap for a car. And I'm sure you could find one that's in a little bit rougher shape for 2-3 grand, which at this point in time is essentially the floor of a running vehicle that'll pass any sort of inspection and is at all safe to drive. So I think it's a pretty good option. If I had to choose some random kind of cheap car to own and I wanted a little bit more space than an actual sedan would give me, I don't know, this might actually be on the list more than I would have thought, which I would not have probably expected myself to say that if you asked me that question 2-3 days ago. I can't say that I've fallen in love with it, to be completely honest, but I definitely see its merit, and I can see how an enthusiast could fall in love with something like this, and this could be a vehicle that would fulfill a lot of unique desires somebody might have. You know, kind of the efficiency of a unibody with the ruggedness of a solid axle, with the tone of a V8, with the off-road capability. I mean, it's pretty neat. So anyways, guys, there's my thoughts. Please let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. God bless America, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.